As so many of us have from up here, the first time we've returned, this is just a wonderful experience, and yet sad to be back in this beautiful sanctuary. It's wonderful to be here, to worship here. It also makes me very sad and miss the rest of our community, and I long for the day that we can all be back together. I'm very honored today to be able to spend a few minutes to present a testimonial as to why this place, St. John's, is such a critical institution for my family, our city, and our nation, and why it needs our support now. My wife, Lori, and I have attended for 33 years now. We actually came here the day before we were engaged in 1987. We joined right before we joined the Episcopal Church, and both the Episcopal Church and St. John's have warmly embraced us in the decades since then. In this beautiful sanctuary, we have had the opportunity to celebrate some of life's great joys, such as the baptism of our 3 children, their confirmations, the beautiful services throughout the year, especially at Easter and Christmas. And we've also found this is a place of refuge to seek much-needed blessed assurance at times of personal loss from dear loved ones, whether they were family members or friends. Also a place of refuge in times of great tragedy, such as September 11th. St. John's has always stood firm on this corner, welcoming. Throughout the years, my entire family has had the opportunity to serve in many capacities here, but always receiving more than we were giving. We've taught Sunday school, and then our children all went through Sunday school, and we've been on the vestry, we've cooked lunch, we've had so many experiences outside of these 4 walls with the larger church community and our larger St. John's community engaging in the important outreach work that we do here. You know, for 204 years now, St. John's has reflected Christ's abundant love from this corner at 16th and 8th Streets, at the very epicenter of temporal power in our nation. It's always stood as a counterpoint to remind all of us that there is something larger than the politics of the day. There is something that we're called to that is bigger. And it's always been a nice counterpoint. When it was constructed in 1816, St. John's was only the second building on Lafayette Square. The White House was the other one. And the White House was still a burned out shell as a result of the destruction wrought by the British during the very recent War of 1812. From these very uncertain beginnings, these very uncertain times, until this very moment, St. John's and our nation have survived and thrived. Throughout, St. John's has stood as a steady voice of Christ's love in an ever-changing world, giving shelter to those fighting for justice throughout. During the depth of the Civil War, President Lincoln would slip out from the White House, walk across the park, and attend an evening service sitting right back there in that pew. It was a rare moment of peace in the midst of terrible conflict that we were offering. In 1963, our rector, John Harper, insisted that the church doors remain open during the March on Washington, and rather than exclude people, instead, we opened our doors and offered shelter to the marchers. And in this very year of 2020, our clergy offered prayers and sustenance to the thousands of marchers who were insisting that we live up to our national ideals of full equality for all Americans. Now we find ourselves here in the midst of the COVID crisis. The COVID pandemic has changed so many things in our world. For our St. John's community of faith, this has meant the loss of our ability to physically come together to worship Christ. This has been very difficult for most of us. Try as we may, Participating via YouTube, no matter how well done, is just not the same as turning to your neighbor and passing the peace and receiving the body and blood of Christ in a corporate environment. In the midst of this chaos, however, all of the good works of this church have been continuing. We continue to support our many outreach ministries, our clergy, and our fantastic music program. Why do we continue to do this in the midst of chaos? Because the work of this church is critical to us personally, to our city, our nation. It is existential to who we are as Christians. But to be blunt, we need money to continue the work of this church. This year, we need your pledges more than ever. We've lost our entire income stream from plate offerings. Some in our community have lost their jobs, their health, friends and family. Everyone is experiencing mental crisis, as well as many are physically impaired because of the results of the crisis. And yet, during all of this turmoil, the church still needs to set a budget for 2021 to be able to determine what programs we can support. So please pledge this year. If you can't pledge as much as in the past, that's fine. We all understand that's what communities do. We all lift each other up. If you're fortunate enough to be able to pledge more than in the past, we certainly welcome and encourage that. And if you can pledge by November 30th, that will greatly assist in the budgeting process for the coming year. As to the question of how much you should pledge, as our former rector, Luis Leon, said, give until it feels good. Give until it feels good. That's always been my guide, and there is just something about knowing what you're doing is helping others. But only you can decide the amount. Critically, though, please pledge, even if it's a small amount. The important thing is to remain involved in this community and continue your support through time, talent, as well as treasure. St. John's survived the challenges of the Civil War, World War I, the 1918 flu pandemic, the Great Depression, World War II, the Great Recession. Despite all of these events, St. John's is here today, bearing witness. Every time one of these crises arrived, the congregation within these walls rose to the challenge, every time. We are now St. John's. We are now the voice of Christ within this community. Let it be our joy and honor to accept this responsibility now and rise to this challenge, as so many generations before us have done. As a community, let us continue to support and sustain this vital witness to the power of God's love, and look forward to the day when we will hear, as in the parable of the talents, "Well done, good and faithful servants." Thank you.